Savvy, in anticipation for A Quiet Place Part 2, which we're actually very lucky in the fact that we're seeing that tomorrow in an early screener. We felt the need, we had to go back and review the first one because the OCD, we just can't handle it on the channel. Like, we've got the second one, we need to talk about the first one, but interestingly enough, I guess this is kind of like what we used to do for retro reviews as well. Like, I've seen this film. I think this was like the third time I've seen this film. You watched this for the first time literally right before we went live. So we're getting like your fresh take on this film. So this is going to be really interesting. We're, of course, talking about the original, A Quiet Place, 2018, horror film directed, starring, probably produced by everything by Joe Krasinski, and also starring his wife, Emily Blunt. Yeah, so as I mentioned, I've seen this a few times now. It's going to be interesting to talk about, I think. We do have a plan. It's going to be completely spoiler-filled, probably. So if you haven't seen A Quiet Place, what are you doing? Go and watch it. You've got days. Well, actually, I don't know when it comes out. When's the official release date? Is it like a week away or so? Or
I think America's this Friday. UK's the following Thursday, but there's like there's going to be like a Cineworld screening on Friday, bank holiday screenings, whatever the hell that's meant to be, like a 1 day early. So basically, guys, the spoilers are going to come on Friday, not from us. The spoilers will come by those that will spoil it, whether you're into it enough, whether you can spoil it, because I'm not going to lie. I went 3 years, didn't even come out 3 years ago, without getting this film spoiled for me, which is quite remarkable given how much I'm on the internet. I did assume a couple of things, but yeah, I kind of want to jump. Actually, let's see the social. I want to jump in with my Quiet Place story as to why I still haven't seen it until tonight. But before we do, of course, this is Chris, you're the horror guy, not me. I assume this is would you say this is a modern horror classic?
I'd say so, yeah.
Classic, but we want to hear from you guys at home. Let's know your thoughts on the first Quiet Place film. If you've seen the second one, please don't comment anything at this point in time. And if you're new to the channel, if you're new to what we do, we've got a lot of videos on the way, new reviews as we Quiet Place Part 2, older reviews, Bond reviews, many other things coming up. So hit that subscribe button. We're going to set some new goals, which we'll decide internally and on one day release to the world. But we also want to get on our social medias. We're going to try and play it up a little bit more. It's Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, Letterboxd.com/Cinema Savvy, and we have a link to the TeePublic store in the description below. And we're also going to round off, as we said, Quiet Place 2 review is going to come this Wednesday. We'll keep it spoiler-free, so if anyone hasn't seen it, you don't have to worry about us saying something or spilling the beans. So that's going to be very fun. We've got a little Bond sandwich going on, of course, on my Majesty's Secret Service tomorrow night. But going back to where I spoke about previously, Corona. This is, many films have been delayed by Corona, many of them. However, I'm going to go out on a limb and say not too many of the big ones have actually been released yet. You can say Tenet, you can say Wonder Woman. I don't know what streaming services ones count or whatnot, but as far as I'm aware, this was, I think, the first film Corona ruined for me properly. As in, I had a ticket booked to watch this film in March of 2020. I had a ticket for a double bill to do A Quiet Place 1 and 2 back to back with one another because I hadn't seen the first one, and I always said I'll watch it right before. And then I think that was the last ticket I had before the first set of delays kicked in. So obviously, it wasn't the Tenet for me in terms of hype, but I was quite gutted that I was looking forward to a double bill of something. But I'm trying to take my mind back to March last year. I don't know what the other films were due out. I don't want to sort of delve on that too much in the past, but that's why it's even later. I picked up the Blu-ray for this, and I've been able to watch it tonight. Literally finished 20 minutes ago, which is great. It's a short film, so I might have had to delay it, which would have been my bad.
It's a shame you didn't get to that double bill because I know we got given a screener for this, an in-person screener. So I guess that kind of has to take precedent over a double bill. But I do think that this film, knowing now that it does have a part 2, because actually that was going to be one of my criticisms with this film. We'll get into the conversation later, but watching this film years ago, I didn't see this in cinema when it first came out, the first Quiet Place film. I caught it afterwards, but I didn't know there was a second one confirmed. I don't even know if it was confirmed at that time or if there was going to be a second one. So, but I'd heard sort of like the hype and, it was picking up traction. A lot of people were talking about it. Even if you go onto lists, sort of like, as you mentioned, like modern horror films, this was always on the list. And I think I watched this one for the first time on kind of like a whim. Like it was just, people are talking about it. I keep seeing it. I want to know what it's about. And I checked it out. And it's a shame because I do think that watching this film again, it would work so beautifully with a double bill. Especially down to the ending and how the film just kind of stops. But now we are getting that part 2. I think we probably will see the resolution to the end of this film, obviously, before moving into the second one. So yeah, I guess we can talk about the plot for this thing as well, in case anyone's watching this review and doesn't know what the hell A Quiet Place is about. In a post-apocalyptic world, a family is forced to live in silence while hiding from monsters with ultra-sensitive hearing. Very, very simple premise. And even like the budget for this thing isn't particularly high. I think it was done on a budget of like 20 mil, give or take a few. Very simple idea, but I think the best thing about this film is that it's just executed so perfectly. Everything's just kind of perfect with it. The direction, the acting's fantastic. The script is very minimalistic, and that, you know, obviously plays into the concept of the film, that there isn't much spoken dialogue in there. A lot of it is done through sign language and subtitles, which I think is very effective. But just the tone and the fact that it's like 90 minutes as well, it was an absolute breeze to get through this film. I know you were fairly down to the wire with it, but in terms of like the pacing with it, it is so good. It does exactly what it needs to do. It doesn't feel like there are any wasted scenes in there. Everything plays thematically into the film, and it's just a very solid film. Now, when I did see that this was a horror film, you know, as you mentioned on sort of like a lot of horror lists, I kept thinking, like, would I, because it doesn't really scare me in any way. I'd say it's more of a tense film. Like, the atmosphere that the film creates is phenomenal, and we'll talk about the sound as well later on in the review. Utilized so well. So it's a very tense and, you know, nail-biting film, but I don't know. It just, when I think of horror, this isn't always the first one that comes to mind. You know, if I was talking about modern horror, I'd say The Conjuring or those kind of films, which are very much horror and exorcisms and possession and ghosts and everything. And this doesn't feel like that. I think it definitely sort of like fits nicely into what's almost like a modern wave of post-apocalyptic films. I think, you know, just watching this film, and I've never played it myself, I have watched Let's Plays of them, The Last of Us, with like the whole clicker things, and you know, this isn't a zombie film, but there are kind of those elements, I think, that you would probably get in a survivalist post-apocalyptic film like those, for example.
Yeah, I think what's a really big thing of this is that everyone's billed this as the horror film, and not to get on the horror high horse, but I don't watch many of them because not because I dislike them. I like a lot of the ones I've seen, but the trope of horror to me is what terrifies you, and it's Jaws. And I look at so many films, I think, is that Shining is the best horror film ever? I'm like, is it though? I was like, it's a psychological thriller that's a fantastic psychological thriller, and I think this film was a thriller. I sat there on the edge of my seat, sort of not terrified. I was like you know, a noise is made, and like, oh shit. The opening scene, probably one of the darkest opening scenes I've seen in a long time, which was horrible to watch, and that. I just don't class it as horror. Maybe that's just me on a side tangent, and the horror experts can jump in. But I saw this as a tense thriller, and I thought, what a way! I think there's nothing better than a film that can naturally create tension. And I think when you have a film that can have tension from the opening scene to the final moments, I think that's a film that's done an extraordinary job. That's been a combination of directed fantastic. Because you can have the premise. But the premise, if it doesn't have the execution, doesn't work, or you can have the execution creates a terrible premise. And I think this film balanced that. And I think John Krasinski, I think he's directed 4 films, including the new one. I've not seen his other ones. I think they're comedies. But to have that sort of, from someone, I'm going to jump in, and I've watched The American Office years ago and I loved it. It's so incredible. I think they call it the Seinfeld curse, where you have these famous sitcoms. I'm kind of on a waffling this one. Your famous sitcoms, I think Seinfeld was the first big one, and no one can ever get out of that character role. They are always, you know, Seinfeld is Seinfeld. I can't remember the actor who plays George, and you've got all these characters. And I think Friends was the same, still is the same, that the 6 of them will never ever escape from being, you know, Ross, Rachel, Phoebe, Chandler, Joey, Monica. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but it's Jim from The Office. And then you're like, whoa, this isn't Jim from The Office. This is someone else. And I thought, what a fantastic, because I think when you've been sort of backed up into that genre for so long, to go, what is the opposite of comedy? It's horror. You know, you're not laughing, you're terrified. It's that ultra opposite emotion. And I think sort of jumping into the direction with the plot works so well. And I think that comes down to him. And I think once you've got that idea, the premise, and I think before we actually talk about the concept of the tone, don't we spoke about first time watching it, but obviously I'm fresh in 20 minutes ago, but I kind of watched this with a lot of hype, and it's really unfair, I think, to approach films knowing they're hyped up, because I think so many films don't work in that sense, that you can have an incredible film, but it's been overhyped to a level where you kind of feel slightly underwhelmed because it's not hit those heights. This was the opposite. This has a, I don't even want to say core reputation. I think I don't know anyone that's disliked this film, and I've watched it tonight, and I thought this is fantastic. And I'm gonna be that guy. It's a shame I didn't get to see it at the cinema. Not even a double bill. Just not gonna watch it back when it came out in 2018. I'd have had a lovely time watching this. Probably would have lost my shit at someone getting the phone out or eating popcorn. But that being said, it's like shut my window, shut the curtains. I was like, I can hear like my family cooking downstairs, and I'm like, it's just not the same. But what I would say is a first time watch as a premise, I will go back and watch this again. Maybe not soon, but I think this has a rewatchability factor. And jumping in before we sort of really deep dive into the tone and the concept, I think the time is a lot to do that. It's 90 minutes. There's no fleshed out Transformers, meteorite crashes to Earth, aliens escape. Now we'll get the scene of them ransacking the town, or as much as I love it, an opening montage showing where all this stuff came from. It starts like day 89.
Yeah,
and you're in it. You're in the pandemic, whatever, and it's silent. And it's like, okay, I'm in. I kind of know a base of it, but I'm in. You've started me. You've put us in a really good spot. You've had a dramatic opening scene. Cut to another year's time. See what's happening. I think that was such a smart way to do it, and you save about 20 minutes. And I know like we shouldn't sit here moaning about like running times to films because I can do it a lot, but I think when you've got a 90-minute film, it's such a rarity that to me it's always been like very much a comedy length. That so many comedies an hour and a half, but you're not wasting time. You're drawn in from the first moment to have that tension take you through to the end, and I think the timing is the reason this film works as well as everything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really unique premise as well. You know, the writers, if I just bring up their names real quick, Brian Woods and Scott Beck, apparently they grew up with a lot of silent films. And you can kind of see that influence in it as well, how they approached it with, you know, little to no dialogue. And you're absolutely right as well. It breezes past at like 90 minutes, give or take. And there aren't any wasted scenes in the film at all. And you mentioned that there isn't really like an origin story for these creatures. It just kind of throws you, you know, head first into the situation. You pick up everything. You understand the gravity of the situation and the rules that they've kind of established in order to survive in this world right from the opening scene. And you know that if you break those rules, if you do make a sound, you're going to have the same fate as that kid in the opening scene.
Yeah.
And it's very clever like that. And I think that as a concept, you don't need this lengthy prologue of these were extraterrestrial creatures that crash landed here and they were in a government lab somewhere and they broke out. You don't need it. It's all just, that's noise. You don't, no pun intended. It's all, you just don't need it in the context of the film. It's just keep it to the bare bones plot that it is. Now, we're getting into sequel territory now, so law of average, if they're doing A Quiet Place Part 2, they're probably going to follow it up with A Quiet Place Part 3. I have to imagine it's going to be a trilogy now. So when I first watched this, I didn't know that sequels were being planned. Watching 2 tomorrow, I'm going to have that in the back of my mind that this is probably going to link into a third film if they are going to have like a Quiet Place trilogy, essentially. So if they are moving into sequel territory, you're going to run the risk of sort of like repeating the same beats as this one, maybe just, you know, more new characters, bigger and louder and everything like that. But maybe they will sort of go into backstory on the creatures in the sequels, because you're going to have something to sort of like justify making loads of sequels out of it. But in the context of this film, you get like a few newspaper clippings here and there, like with some information where it was sort of like at the height of the attack. I do question that though. There are a few, if I'm really nitpicking with this film, there's only like a few moments. There's a bit in the opening scene where something falls off a shelf and it seems like it's really loud, and I'm like, okay, well, which sounds will attract something and which things won't? There's people sort of like flicking a lighter in one scene, like a Zippo lighter. I'm like, is that going to attract anything? But the concept of newspapers coming out at the time that these creatures attacked, maybe they came in drips and drabs, but I'm like, printing presses are quite loud. How would they, you know, get these things out there? I don't know. But again, it does kind of give it some sense of not universe building, but marginal. I think you need something like that. And that's me if I'm really nitpicking the rules of this thing, but it works for the film that it's in.
Yeah, I think it gives it just that right amount of backup that I think the question I'd have had is, okay, not because I know there's a sequel coming out, but it's set in essentially one location, bar, I guess you got the river scene and the opening scene, but in theory, it's a very much rundown. We're not cutting around the world, not seeing what's going on where. And I think those clippings just help not necessarily paint a picture, but it is very much that, you know, were they preparing for this or did it just happen? And I think it leaves it quite ambiguous, and I think it backs up that saving time factor that we spoke about, where we don't have to have an intro to these things. We don't need to see the I'm going to make a comparison to War of the Worlds because Xavier's just done a 4K steelbook, but I always think of that when you've got those great scenes where the military's going in and the people are coming out, and it's that how are they interacting for the first time with these aliens. And this film, I think it was just smarter to put you in it. But you'd imagine 90 days in, not to say these aliens are coronavirus, but you'd imagine somewhere something was happening. But when it's like military can't pierce armor and they've got shots of like the alien like about to kill a soldier, I'm like, yeah, that photographer had a good day. It's kind of like when you look at Spider-Man, like, I wonder how he takes those amazing pictures. Plot twist, it's him. No, I think that it's a fun thing with that. I think you are right though that it's not trying to be too grand. And it is a bit of a weird point, but I'd imagine that's just something that the studio would have been like, listen, we need to have a sense of placement to see where we are at. That being said, let's speak about the aliens, because the first time I saw them, I knew something about long legs. I think I'd seen like a photo, or I think whenever they show it Quiet Place Part 2 at the cinema, I sort of put my head down, and at that point, I think I'd seen the long legs. I kept thinking of Venom. Not Tom Hardy's Venom either, the Raimi Venom. I don't know what it is. It's like, it feels like there's a human bald head. And it's like, right, we're going to articulate the jaw, put the Venom teeth in, and also, as you have that theory, as the film progresses, like, oh my God, high-pitched frequencies are the enemy. Mm. And it's like, Venom. Good thing this isn't produced by Avi Arad. We can get that out of the way. But somewhere he is gutted that this film came out. He wasn't involved. Yeah. But I love the concept. I don't know why. That I think when you see that little kid in the opening, it's almost like a sort of, let's get like a Daddy Long Legs and just like put it on steroids. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, like that's quite terrifying in a weird way. I don't know. I think the design felt original enough. Yes, I can say it looks like Venom, but the concept of the alien, the fact it is all about silence, and the fact that it's not a bloke that has super hearing, it's not an animal that has super hearing. It very much looks like an alien that's fell to Earth that's just doing this thing. I don't know if that was just me.
See, I'm going to disagree with you here. I agree with the Venom thing. Not that he looks like Venom, but the high frequency thing, I was immediately reminded of Spider-Man 3, the one true Spider-Man 3 Venom. But I do have to kind of agree with we've just got a comment come up here. I don't think it's an original design for the monster. And honestly, the monster designs and the monsters in general are kind of my least favorite thing about the film. They work for the film. I still love the film and it still functions, as an antagonist in the film, this, force to be reckoned with. But I think, like Jaws, I think you mentioned Jaws, that kind of suspense, that sort of like dragging it out and only catching glimpses of it until the very end. When you see the creature in full, it stops being scary for me. I like when you might only see like a leg or an arm or like a side of a face or something like that. But I think, I'm going to get on my CGI high horse here. I don't think these needed to be CGI. I think you could have done some puppetry of these things, at least in close up. I think, you have like this close up of like the ear, and I don't think the effects are particularly good. Now, these effects were done by ILM, which really surprised me because I thought it was probably just, an effects house that, the budget wasn't exactly high for the film. Maybe they just got sort of like a low end effects team. Not that the effects look terrible, but they do kind of clash for me with the overall tone. And the actual design, I just don't think is that imaginative or that creative. It seems now where you have like any kind of monster, it always has to look like the Cloverfield monster. And again, in that film, like the Cloverfield monster, it's this big daddy long leg thing, as you mentioned, with these big gangly arms. Wagman Studios mentioned it there as well. That's another comparison. Looks like the design of the Demogorgon from Stranger Things. Again, I agree with that. And it just seems like a lot of modern monsters do just kind of have that uniform look at the moment. So that is kind of a drawback for me of the film, was the actual design of them. Apparently Krasinski did the motion capture for the movement of them though, which I wasn't aware of until reading it before this. So that's quite fun. Just imagine him in like the suit with the dots just like flailing around and everything. But they work for the film. I'm not going to say they don't, but there isn't really a fear factor of them. And I think that kind of comes in where I said I wouldn't class this as a horror film. I agree with you. I would count this as like a really intense thriller film. But I'm never terrified by these things. The tension is built up through the performances, which we'll talk about in the second, the sound or the lack of sound and that anticipation. But once you see the creature, I'm like, that just looks kind of ridiculous. You know, I don't. That's just me with them. I wasn't terrified by them. I wasn't scared by them.
I have an image of Andy Serkis finding out there was a new monster in town, and he wasn't given a call to do the motion capture.
And his name is Joe Krasinski. Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I know. I see. I completely. You know, Strange Things is a blur. I watched them all in like less than a week 2 years ago. So that's the Demogorgons, the plant thing, right? Or is that the giant cloud from season 2?
Well, honestly, all the monsters kind of look the same in each season of Stranger Things. Yeah, I think the Demogorgon was in season 1 though specifically.
It's been a while. Season 4 though, this year, hopefully, guys. Hopefully, we can get some more info. That little random side tangent aside. No, I completely understand of that. I think maybe because I'm so fresh to it, it's not a time to settle in. Like looking into it, reading into it, that motion capture. I need it. You know, you ever see the Benedict Cumberbatch?
Yes, the Smaug.
When he did the Smaug. And I just want the image now of John Krasinski. Like, look, it's Jim from The Office, and you're gonna be like, what? And like, what's he doing? But yeah, it's one of them where that's fair with that. What I wanted to add to them as well, though, we mentioned sound. Where do we want to begin? Sound in the film or soundtrack? Because I think both of these are as important as either.
I think we'll talk about sound first, because I think that is definitely the big proponent of this, and it gives us a chance to bring up some of the comments here as well. Wagman Studio says, the first time I saw, I wasn't a huge fan. I did see it on a plane, which was a big mistake, but then watching it again the other day, I really liked it. And then Carl says, this was a great experience in the cinema. Like George, I was worried the audience would ruin it, but I was lucky and the silence was respected. I was going to compare this to an even more recent film, to be honest, with The Sound of Metal, how I still haven't had the chance to see that in the cinema yet, but I did mention how I think your experience and your takeaway of that film is going to be crucial depending on the environment that you see that film, especially a film that focuses so much on sound, the lack of it, or when it uses sound to its advantage in the film. And I think that this film is no exception. I think this was even nominated for an Academy Award for, I think it was Best Sound Editing or Best Sound Mixing, some kind of Sound Academy Award it was nominated for. And quite rightly so as well. I think that the whole film's based on the crux of that premise alone, the sound, you know, the lack of it. And I think as well, the casting, we'll jump onto the performances in just a second, but I did want to mention, because the children actors are really good in this as well. All the performances are great, but especially for me, the daughter in the film, Millicent Simmons, who herself is a deaf actress and helped them on set with the sign language and everything. So I think that was absolutely crucial. And yeah, there are just like moments where it plays with it, even down to the communication in the film. I think originally the idea was they didn't even want subtitles in the film. They just wanted it to be the hand gestures and you as an audience kind of pick up on their way of communicating with each other. But I think there were some key bits of information pertaining to the high frequency being a weakness for the creatures, and the whole I love you thing at the end, and the argument that the daughter has with the father, where they really needed that added context of some kind of dialogue. So then subtitles were added into it. But I think it's tremendous, and it's probably a film alongside Sound of Metal where I'd say it's if you're looking specifically for sound and how sound can be applied into a film, it's easily one of the best, and quite rightly, deservedly so, with an Oscar, which is surprising for what is classed as a horror film as well, because, you know, horror films can be great as well, and a lot of them just kind of get overlooked at the Academy Awards. So although it didn't win, it's great that it was at least, nominated in some respect.
Yeah, I think when you've got a film like this, you need the... When I'm going to make a comparison to Ex Machina, when obviously that bit different, I did win its Oscar for CGI. That was this massive moment that the sort of 10-15 million budget film has outdone the $250 million films, and I think the budget for this one was about 20 million. You think that they've approached this very much with sound being almost a character. I think Sound of Metal is a really good comparison for something new as well, and the moments in which they want to apply it. I think for me the big thing is the scenes where they're running outside. You think, look at moments like that, you know, they're not wearing shoes or that kind of thing, and then you get one of my favorite scenes, which is at the lake, which is when he's trying to like show his son, you know, I'm assuming how to fish or how to sort of learn to life, but it's that brilliant speech that says, you know, this sound is consistent for them. They'll know that we can make a noise here. And I love that dynamic that when they go into the waterfall and they're shouting with one another, and I just love that approach that we also got to hear them talk. That it could have very much been a completely silent film, but I think you get those moments of reality where look, I'm not saying it's going to happen, obviously, but if it did, it is that where could you speak? And it's such a smart use of sound. And it reminds me of when you're sort of, I don't mean this is a bad thing. You know, when you're playing games, you get these like mega headphones, they all hype up, and it's like sound become, I think, more, I mean, it's always been important anyway, but for very much technologies and gaming kind of things, the last 10 years has really had a really big, this is incredible, here's like 3D audio, all these gimmicks. But look at Quiet Place, and it's such a simple premise, and I think, you know, where are we going to add in people speaking? I think the editing, when they're jumping from scene to scene. Oh, there's my cough. Sorry.
Oh, there you go. You're back now.
There we go. Sorry, my internet's been playing up tonight. It's as simple as them sort of going from scene to scene when they're editing the finale, when you've kind of got noise and it's all those tiny little stones, and then you're cutting back to Emily Blunt back in the house. I think the sound has been edited. I think if they get the sound wrong in this film, then the film doesn't work. I think it's as simple as that. But it is one of them where I think it does add another dimension to it. And I think going in hand with that is the soundtrack. There wasn't a big bombastic, you know, Hans Zimmer express for anything. There was very much a recurrent theme that's used at sort of different lengths and different styles. But I thought the soundtrack for this added to it because it fitted in with that world, with that darker night type thing. Because really the plot of this film takes place across like 2 days. Mm-hmm. I think that's where it helps. It's not elongated, it's not drawn out, and having the soundtrack for any tense moments, long moments, action scenes, I think that worked really well.
Yeah, Marco Beltrami did the soundtrack. I was just having a look what he's done loads of stuff. I'm not even going to mention everything. Mostly sort of like the action genre he's sort of like orientated himself. Stuff like iRobot, I think Logan as well. There were some aspects he did as well with it. It's a great score, and I think that, you know, I was watching this and thinking, and I think that even this sort of like crossed Krasinski's mind as well when he was directing it. Did the film need a soundtrack? Would it be more effective if it was just sound that was happening in the frame with no sort of like added music to create a mood? Could you still get that through? And I mean, I think that's probably an interesting experiment. I'd love to see a version without the music, but nonetheless, it does kind of make you realize that this sounds stupid, like you're watching a film, but with a soundtrack, it is like, okay, this is a mainstream film. It's not trying to be anything else. And it does remind you that you're watching a film where you do have this sort of like outside music coming in as well. But I think it works. I think it's understated enough. The sort of like, there's really sort of two themes, I would say, in this. There's the music, this sort of like droning noise that plays whenever the creatures are on screen, which really works. I messaged you beforehand. It was reminding me of Thanos' theme and the T-1000 sort of like motif that plays in T2, but it works for it. And then there's this sort of more melodic and sort of like haunting theme that's like the main theme of the film, which I thought was really effective as well. And going back to The Last of Us, it's kind of like the music in that, where the music in The Last of Us is very understated, but it works for the situation, and it knows when to not be present in the film. It knows when to be subtle enough, and then if it does need to ramp up, it does that. But it never like overstays its welcome. It never overshadows the drama of what's going on in the film or the tension. And I think it does add to the tension. I think having a soundtrack in the film was absolutely the right call for it. I'm assuming he's going to come back to score the second one. I'm just going to double check. Yeah, exactly the same composer. So you're going to have that consistency as well with the themes, which is always nice. I think we should talk about the performances now, because again, you know, very small film, very small cast, just one family really, and one old dude that shouts pretty much in this film. I love it. And I think the fact that you do have Krasinski with his real life wife, Emily Blunt, I think that gives them just that natural chemistry, which you get on screen. Although there's the lack of dialogue, you can see that the bond they have. And I mentioned like the children actors as well. Both are absolutely fantastic in this film. And I don't say the tone. I'd say the tone is probably a lot more scarier than some of Spielberg's films, but you mentioned stuff like War of the Worlds. I was reminded of some of the tension and atmospheric stuff from Jurassic Park, especially the Velociraptor stuff in the kitchen, how tense that is. When you do focus and the film cuts away to the children actors and you're seeing them in peril trying to get out of that, there are kind of those Spielbergian, J.J. Abrams-like elements to this film, I think, which I think sort of like make it appealing as a sort of like a more low budget blockbuster kind of film. But I think there's even a moment where one of the creatures makes a noise that sounds exactly like the Velociraptor from Jurassic Park. You know, it is ILM. I don't know if they sort of like threw in a couple of the sound effects that they tend to do with some films, if it's the same, you know, companies working behind it. But I like those elements. It all comes together, and usually I kind of roll my eyes at children actors like, oh God, but they're all fantastic. They bring that maturity, they bring the emotion, and as I mentioned, the daughter, I think especially, is outstanding in this film. Easily one of the best, if not the best actress for me in the whole film.
Yeah, I think as well, there's a lot to be said that with sort of these more modern films, we're seeing very much that conversation of, you know, if you have deaf characters in a film, it should be played by deaf actors. If you've got transvestites, they should be played by them. You get this conversation now where I think it's starting to come in more with gay actors or people in drag, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, some people say that, you know, it's overblown, it's PC, as all that stuff, which I don't think it is. I think to get that, I hate using the word authenticity because it makes it sound like you're being selective, but it is very much in that situation where it's, you know, as you mentioned earlier, she was helping them on set, she was giving them direction. And I think because that is how she hears that she is deaf, she's not going to get commands off the director in scenes like, yeah, get louder. None of that kind of stuff. This is all performance driven. And I think there's something to be said about getting casting decisions like that right. And I think we've seen it. I think obviously voice acting is the big one where it's very different, where I think that industry itself is not going to collapse, but I think big changes are due in the next couple of years, which we're seeing hints of with The Simpsons. But it's one of them where I think by getting that right, you get the best performance you can, because it's somebody that doesn't need to. I don't want to pick on Eddie Redmayne. You know, when it was like the Danish Girl, and it's like, this is Eddie Redmayne pretending to be a lady to get an Oscar nomination. And then this is Eddie Redmayne pretending to be Stephen Hawking to get his Oscar. And it's such, I'm not saying this is an Oscar bait film, but as more of a reflection on Hollywood, that sort of the ex-actor playing this role because they know they're going to get guaranteed. It's that great line in Extras when Kate Winslet's joking to Ricky Gervais, you know, do the Holocaust film, get the Oscar. And it's funny because it's true. It's a sad commentary, and I know I'm off on a side point right now, but I think that's where this one gets it right. And I think as well, Noah Jupe, I didn't know he's in this. I've seen him in Honey Boy, which is an incredible film. I do recommend it to anyone to see. However, a lot harder to watch now that all the stuff's out about Sheila Booth. And he's also in Ford versus Ferrari. I always say this, one of the few young actors. You know, when you get sort of child actors and you can tell like which ones are going to be genuine stars and which ones, not being horrible, are going to be at Comic-Con for the next 10 years. He's one of them. He's going to be a fantastic actor. And I think his physical performance, because he's playing like an 8-9-year-old kid, his physical performance in this, I thought was phenomenal. Mm-hmm. The whole scared stuff, the running. And I think when you've got kid actors that can do stuff like that, the beauty of it is, and I don't mean this as a criticism because I adore Jurassic Park, but it's so easy for them just to get everyone to scream. And I know it's such a given trope, not just for child actors, any horror film, anything like that. Whereas this one was all about the science. I think the scene of Emily Blunt trying to give birth to that making a sound was horrifying because just, you know, how physically exhausting that was for the characters we see in later scenes. It was incredible filmmaking that. And I think something to be said that going back to our conversation about the sound, it changes the entire film. It makes it like a film we've not seen before. The premise is that no one can make a noise and they'll come and get you. It's simple, it's effective, and I think it was able to bring out the best in everyone in this. And I think John Krasinski as well, playing that lead role, the fact he directed it as well was superb, and all that's his final moment with his kind of it's the sort of war cry, isn't it? When they're sort of like waiting, this I thought was fantastic. I absolutely loved that scene, and the sign language of the daughter as well, the I Always Have Jew, got me a bit misty, but it is one of those where I thought performance-wise, you know, you can have a good concept, but if you don't get it right, it doesn't work, and the cast was perfect for this film to work.
Yeah, and, you know, going back to what you said about the acting, I am glad that they did get a deaf actress to play the character of the daughter in this. I don't think it's essential. So, like, you know, you mentioned, like, Eddie Redmayne and stuff like that. I don't think you have to have, you know, a transvestite or, you know, transgender person to play a transvestite or a transgender character. I think, you know, because that takes away the concept of acting, you know, from films. You look at Rain Man, for example, with Dustin Hoffman. This is like another discussion, but fantastic performance. I don't think you need someone with the same condition to play a character, but I do like that they went the extra mile with this one to get a deaf actress, because not only is she going to help on set, but, you know, they did have, I'm sure, you know, coaches on the set and people who were, you know, fluent in sign language to kind of coach them, but just having an actress on set with them as well, she could kind of say, you know, it needs to be more fluent, or you need to do it like this. And she could give that added input to it. So I do appreciate the filmmakers for bringing her on board with this. I'm going to bring up Carl's comment here because this did cross my mind as well when I was watching it. Did you think it was a strange decision for the couple to bring a child into this world? Babies make noise, lots of noise. I do kind of agree. And if I was in that situation, you put something on the end of it, or you ask Emily Blunt very nicely to keep her legs closed, given the current situation, until it all blows over, and then you can repopulate the world accordingly. So, they have got to repopulate the world. You get the impression that the entire world is fucked and there's barely anyone alive at the moment. So, you got to do what you got to do, but it's going to be very interesting, especially with the sequel, with it being a newborn. I guess it does they do show things in the film where they have like an underground place, and there's ways that they can keep the baby more quiet given the times that it is always crying. But I think, when you get to that second film, it might sort of, stray the lines of believability just a tad, because babies do cry a lot. And it's going to be interesting to see how they sort of get around that in the sequel, because the sequel is a direct sequel. It's not, jumping years in advance where the baby suddenly grew up. Still a baby in the sequel, so that'll be interesting to see. And you mentioned about the whole birthing scene as well and how she had to do it silently. I think we have to talk about another very painful scene. I'm not going to say it's more painful than childbirth, but by God, watching this scene, Wagman mentioned it earlier, the bit with the nail was pretty scary. Yeah. The second most painful stepping on a nail scene I have seen in cinema, the first, which will always be for me, is Home Alone. Or is it Home? I think it's the first Home Alone film. I was just expecting her to let out a huge scream like Harry in that film. It's absolutely horrible, and I love how it's set up as well, because that it's gonna have that setup, the way that it focuses on it, it lingers on it. I do question if she's walking down the stairs the first time though, and I think is she carrying like a sack of potatoes or something that gets snagged on it. If it's getting snagged on it, just take care of it in that moment right there. But it's a beautiful setup, but it's one of the grisliest scenes in the film, I think, because again, you sort of put yourself in that situation. You know how that would feel. We've all trod on something we wish we hadn't have trod on at some point, but yeah, winces every time. And that's a sign of good filmmaking as well, if it can sort of get that really visceral reaction with you in the audience as well.
Yeah, it's the fact that it's been set up, and in a film like this where time is of the essence, if there is a 1 second close up of a nail left on the ground, that's going to be coming back at some point. And it was the moment in which, okay, I wonder when they'll bring the nail back, and is it going to be during a big action scene or something? I don't know. And then her water breaks, and you're like, oh my God, she's going to go down the stairs. And it's because it's coming. I think it makes it even tougher to watch. And it's the fact she can't make a noise. I know she drops a couple of things, and that does kickstart obviously the events, but it is still that reaction. It's grisly. It's horrifying, and I don't know if that makes it horror, but it's just the way it's done. I think even did they have like blood coming out of the feet as well?
Yeah.
Like footsteps, and it's just it's horrid. But it's so, as you know, it's great filmmaking. It's so well done, and if you're getting that on repeat viewings, then that's just a sign that it works even more than we thought.
Yeah, and I think with Home Alone, I'm just remembering he steps on
slowly
and it kind of sinks in. You get a bit of the sound, but this was like full on bump, like the entire nail. It's horrible. I'm thinking about it now. It's sort of like getting me on edge a little bit. Moving on, what else can we talk about with this film? We talked about the music. I guess it's final thoughts. It's a very small film, really. As I mentioned, it's very economic with its time. Gets in, gets out, does exactly what it needs to do. So if I go through my overall thoughts, really, I will mention the ending real quick. So when I watched this film with no knowledge that any sequels are coming out, I did kind of hate the ending. I'm fine with, abrupt endings in films, but this felt like it just stopped. It just stopped mid-scene. I know that we were talking a little bit about this before, and you were saying, well, you kind of know where it's going. You know that she'll probably take out the next one, but I thought this was a one and done film, and I was expecting some kind of resolution at the end of it, or to take out that third one, and then you get like a scene at the end with, the mother bonding with the children and sort of walking off into the horizon or something like that. Proper definitive ending for the film. As it is almost like a tune in next week or a to be continued kind of thing. And I didn't know that was going to happen at the time. Now that we are getting a sequel, tomorrow, and when we watch it, I do think it's going to pretty much pick up immediately from where this one left off. I get that impression, or I think we're going to have some kind of flashback. I do think you need to finish the scenario that they teed up at the end of this film in the next film. I think it's going to be a lot more palatable, and it was, going back to it today, knowing that they have a plan for it. but I still do have that against films where they will end abruptly. Even if you are having loads of sequels, I do like each respective film to have its own definitive ending, or to have a concept of an ending, if you know what I mean.
No, that's true. I think with me, because the big reveal is the hearing aid, and we know there's going to be a moment where it's going to be used as a weapon, and the way the scene's done, you know, the sound, the shotgun to the head once it's all opened up. I think the moment you see the others running, I just saw it as the ending. Like, okay, yeah, we know they're screwed because they've now clocked the weakness. I think that was the big thing, is when they keep cutting to the whiteboard, say like weakness question mark. I think if we showed 3 of them on screen, it would be a bit of a killer. Like, we're just going to go again, and I don't think you'd have had the tension for that finale. Whereas now, maybe it's because I know there's a sequel coming out. The fact there were always 3 of them as well. I think had it have been one monster that was there, I always think that I don't think that would have worked, because then it would have been like, why didn't they go away? Why didn't they go to the town? Or that it's a sequel if there was only ever one and now there's more. So I think it was actually pretty smart by leaving it in there. Whether they always planned a sequel or thought maybe we could do it, but I think the ending worked better. I think again it helped show that, because we know they're not going to die. You know, the Ross, the dad, they're not going to kill the family, they're not going to kill the newborn or the daughter. So I think two extra actions would have been a bit pointless. That being said, I'm curious to see how the second film will start. Will it start then, or will it? I think a lot of films tend to do that kind of thing when it cuts like after the action, and you can make the assumption what's happened. So I'm very intrigued to see how the second one's going to start up, seeing that ending. But I loved the ending for it. I think it was so well built up.
Yeah, I honestly think that, I mean, I don't know if a sequel was planned. I think they would have liked to have got a sequel when they made this thing, but I think it is kind of like the business model, because Platinum Dunes produced this as well. That was sort of like the company. I think Michael Bay's involved with it. They usually do a lot of horror remakes, and one of their models is to make a film with a very small budget, and they always tend to make loads and loads of money. And that was the case with this one. As we said, 20 mil budget, and I think it made like 320 mil or something like that. It was very financially successful, which, you know, when a film's very successful on a small budget, you know, you're probably going to get a sequel, and we're getting that sequel. We will be seeing that tomorrow. I would thoroughly recommend this film. If you haven't seen it already, absolutely check it out. I think it's a fantastic thriller film. If you do want to say it's a horror film, you know, that's a discussion whether it's a thriller or a horror. Either one, I think it's fantastic in both. Brilliant performances, amazing tension building, probably one of the best tension building in a modern film, especially like a film of this type of genre. And the scares, if there are any jump scares in it, they're all peppered in, and they're earned specifically. That's a thing that I have with horror as well. It's very easy just to crank up the soundtrack or do like a startling jump scare, but if you do that, if you rely on that too much, it's just not scary, it's just startling. But this, with its, you know, atmosphere and its tension building, it's fantastic. I'm very much looking forward to seeing the sequel as well. Rewatching this, getting prepared for it. I'm ready to sort of uncover more of what's out there in this world that it's created. And, you know, if there is going to be an end in sight, if they are going to manage to get rid of all of these things, I think it's moving into very interesting territory. So, yeah, I guess they're my final thoughts on the film. Absolutely check it out.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is one of those films which is a must-watch as long as your environment's correct. If you're going to watch this, don't get your phone out. Don't sit on the phone. I know I was at risk of that once or twice, but you know, shut the curtains, turn the lights off, dim it down, try and watch it at the cinema, anything like that. This is a film that commands your attention. And I think that's the best way to have this film service. It's very interesting seeing a family dynamic. I guess we don't really get many husband-wife sort of duos anymore, acting and directing. I'm sure there are a couple, but it's one of them where this is a must-see. And I think you've got a couple of young stars on the horizon. So do see this. I think this will be a film where people keep revisiting over the next sort of 10, 20 years. I think this is all the ingredients to have that legacy. And I'm very curious to see what the second one follows in its footsteps, because if the second one's bad, this will make the first one look better. If the second one's good, make the first one look better still. So I think it's in a win-win situation looking at the future, and, you know, making 350 mil off a 20 mil budget, any producer's dream.
Absolutely. And I really hope the second one's good as well. As you mentioned, it's never really occurred to me that it could be bad from what I've seen of the trailers. And I have seen that trailer many, many times. Actually, that's going to be a blessing tomorrow when I finally saw the film. Hopefully I'll never have to see a trailer for A Quiet Place Part 2 again. But yeah, that'll do it for our review on the first one. Do comment below. We've had some people commenting tonight, and thank you for everyone who's jumped on and commented as we've gone through on this. But if you've just discovered this now, if there's something that we didn't talk about, there's something else you want to talk about the film, please do like, comment, share, and subscribe. Let us know your thoughts on this film and your thoughts going into A Quiet Place Part 2. Speaking of that, as we mentioned at the beginning, we will have our review on that this upcoming Wednesday at 8 p.m. It will be spoiler free, so even if you haven't seen it by then, you haven't got to worry about anything. But it'll be good to get our opinions out on that one. And of course, with cinemas reopening, we're going to have new films, which is always nice. Obviously, Quiet Place Part 2 being one of them, and hopefully many more coming in the upcoming weeks. So definitely do subscribe to the channel, because we'll be covering all of those when they come out. And obviously, in tandem with the new releases, we are going back to some of the old ones as well with our James Bond retrospective. So we will be back on Tuesday next week. Well, this Tuesday, we've got our pre-recorded on Her Majesty's Secret Service coming out. Next week, it's going to be Diamonds Are Forever. I had to try and remember which one it was then. So that's going on as well. There's so many more and new ideas as well. We're not going to announce anything yet, but there are new show ideas in the works. We've got you covered for content. So if you want to follow us on our social media as well to stay up to date with all of these things that we've got coming out, best place to do that is either at Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy. You can find us on Letterboxd as well at Cinema Savvy. And also there is a link in the description to the TeePublic where you can get some of our merch, some of our t-shirt designs, and, maybe we'll even introduce some new designs along the way. So do check that out as well. This has been fun chatting this film. So we'll see you guys on the next video. Take care, everyone.